There's a newsletter back there, there's pencils back there, there's brochures, and there's a postcard that is of the train depot here in town. And that, so if you didn't get any of that stuff when you leave, well, you feel free to pick it up. The Prairie Letters book is back there on the table also. It's not a freebie, I'm sorry. It's $15, which includes tax. So if you're interested in reading about settlers on the prairie here in Sumner County, why, you might want to purchase one. If you want to become a member, see me, and it's $10 per person, $15 for a married couple, and I will gladly take your money. And there's a form back there to fill out. So, and then we're going to start with the flag salute. They do have a flag in here, surprise, surprise. And it's right on there. Yeah, and we're always glad to have Jim come and talk. We're planning to have meetings in September and October. One of them will be about the Memorial Auditorium because the auditorium is 100 years old this year. If you didn't know that, there you go. That building is 100 years old this year. And we plan to do a program about that in conjunction with what the chamber and the city are doing to honor that building and that. And then September, I'm not sure what we're doing yet. So we'll wait and see.
Maybe House History, maybe.
Maybe. But watch the newspapers, watch the sign out in front of the auditorium because we put it on there. Watch, if you have Facebook or our website, you can find what's happening and what the program will be and that. So, and I usually put it in the newsletter if I know what it is. So we'll hopefully get more information out.
Jane, when are you going to do Memorial Auditorium?
I think October, because the chamber's wanting to do something in November. So we thought the closer we could do to that would work better for them, and they were glad about that. So, and I think we've kind of kind of asked Jim to work on. Jim does a wonderful program, and so without any further ado, I'm going to let Jim Bales do our program on the Chisholm Trail.
So first off, I did this program for the International Cattle Trails Association on the Zoom meeting last week. So Sheriff called me why I just said, well, I can do this because I've kind of worked it up, but that doesn't mean I still won't muddle through it. But anyway, so some people have already asked me about how the trails are going to get designated. And Gary, you probably know more about that than I do. I know they're working on it. In fact, I think a lot of that stuff is passed. It's just a matter of going through all the government.
Well, it's been in the House of Representatives, it's got to go to the Senate, and then back to the House of Representatives. I think that's what it is.
So it's just a back and forth.
Senate, then Representatives, and back to Senate. One there, but it's on its route. They have a way to go there. And they run into some problems in Oklahoma, and Texas,
Oh, down in Texas.
with some ranchers.
Well, that figures. That figures. Okay. The other thing, I suppose, I do this mostly to promote the museum. So part of this presentation will be promoting the museum and the other museums here in town. Forgive me, I thought I would go ahead and finish right in the program, so I left it in. And I hope it's not too long. Please silence the cell phones if you got them. And then I need to tell you that I got this magic hat here, who, when I put it on, I'm going to channel the spirit of the real speaker tonight, okay? So just be ready for that. Let's try that, see how it works. Howdy, folks. Glad you could make it. Glad to see you this evening. My name is Robert Arthur Davis, and most people down in Texas call me Colonel, but up here in Kansas they just call me Tex. You want to answer that? See if they'll take care of it again. I apologize. The museum security system happens to be having a problem right this instant. Didn't you know it? Anyway, my name's Robert Davis.
Hold on just a minute.
I was a Texas cattleman, rancher, businessman, and I'm here tonight to tell you a little bit about the Chisholm Trail in Sumner County. I was asked to do that. And, so I'll see what I can come up with. First, I'll tell a little bit about myself, and then I'll talk about this little town of Wellington that I helped to establish, and then I'll tell you a few stories on the trail here in Sumner County. Now, first let me tell you a little something about the Chisholm Trail that I know. Of course, it was mostly known as the cattle trail coming up from Texas through the Indian Territories, Oklahoma, and then up into Kansas. And it was named after a Scottish Indian trader by the name of Jesse Chisholm, because he would go down into South Oklahoma, North Texas, and trade with the Wichita Indians. He kind of went down around Fort Cobb, Fort Sill, Anadarko, and would trade with the Indians up to Wichita. But the first European that really set foot in Kansas, of course, was Coronado in 1541. But he didn't come anywhere near us. He went up more up by Salina in place. But there was, 50 years later, about 1601, there was a Spaniard by the name of Juan de Onate de Salazar. And he was also a conquistador. And he came up he probably did ride part of that trail. Now this trail that Jesse Chisholm followed, while a lot of people credited all the cattle trail and the cattle industry, these basically were Indian trails that the Indians used for maybe thousands of years. And Mr. Onate, he followed that up. That's there. He followed that trail up and ended up in a little town called Ark City. I apologize. And when he got to Ark City, he found the city of Exanoa. Now, this Exanoa village was inhabited by about 20,000 Indians. They call them Ranados, but today we call them Wichita Indians. And there were so many of them that it kind of scared him off, and he turned around and headed south. Now, the neat thing about these Indians is they lived in these grass houses, and when he went through there, he counted all the grass houses, and each grass house had 10 people, so they knew they had at least 20,000 people and maybe 30,000 people. So anyway, there's quite a story there. If you can get over to Ark City, that museum over there, they'll tell you a really good story about that. Now the Wichita Indians were tattooed. They tattooed their faces, lines on their faces, and this ended up to be the Indian sign for it. Wichita Indians was this swiping your face. Now other Indians that traveled this trail was also Chief Black Beaver. He guided about 500 troops, Union troops, out of Texas up through the territories, possibly going over some of what we call the Chisholm Trail. Made it all the way up to Fort Riley, Kansas with those soldiers during the Civil War to avoid us Confederates down there. They didn't like us Confederate Texans. And another fellow that traveled the trail quite a bit was Mr. William Bill Buffalo Mathewson. And he was quite the character. He was out of Wichita as well. The Indians were very, I won't say afraid, but they definitely respected him greatly. And if you look at those eyes, I think I'd respect them too. Now, let me tell you a little bit about myself, because this is about the time I kicked in here, is when the trail opened up for the cattle. And Jesse Chisholm, of course, had traveled with those Wichita Indians. He was trading with them down in North Texas. And then after that Civil War, and the cattle trade started up, that's when I got involved. So, as I said, my name's Robert Arthur Davis, Tex, and I like to talk about myself, but then I think it also adds a little credibility to my story. So I was a Texas cattle rancher, businessman, and a cattle drover, and I made the trip up the Chisholm Trail several times. Heck, I actually named the town of Wellington. I'll tell you about that here in a minute. Now, I was born in Wilson County, Tennessee in 1821. I married my wife, Mary, in 1845, and we had a couple of youngins. And about 1850, while we packed them youngins up, and we moved south to Texas, great state of Texas. And I settled by me spread just south of Dallas, a little town called Waxahachie, Texas. You might have heard of that before, in Ellis County. And we raised cattle and raised kids, and we were doing very well. But then along came that war between the states, that nasty little war, and I joined up with the Confederate Army, and I spent 4 years running around Texas trying to protect Texas and run them Union soldiers out there, them Yankees. But after the war, I went back to Waxahachie. We had plenty of cattle. We didn't know what the heck to do with all the cattle, and they weren't paying anything for it there in Texas. But I heard about this man up in Kansas who would give me 3 times my money for those Texas cattle, so I decided to take them up to Kansas. But of course, to get there, you got to go through the Indian territories. Well, being a businessman, I decided that there was more money to be made than just in cattle. So there were a lot of pilgrims down there in Texas that wanted to go north and go westward. And so I gathered up a lot of those pioneers and settlers and made up a wagon train. And I led a wagon train up through the Indian territories. How I did it was I put one big cattle herd ahead of my wagon train, and then I had the wagon train, and then another big herd. Now, I don't know how the others did it, but that's the way I did it, and it just seemed right, and it worked really well. I had, some accounts say I had about 50 wagons in my wagon train. Now, I don't recollect that number, but then I've been dead over 120 years, and my memory's not quite so good. But we gathered up, and we headed north. I hired a couple of Indian scouts to lead us up through the territories. And that was a good thing, because on the way, we saw several burned out homes and burned out soldiers were. We made it through okay, and we got out of the territories and into Kansas. I went to market, sold my cattle. Those pilgrims, they got on their wagons and they went westward and they went northward and scattered through the country. And then I turned around and headed right back down to Texas. Gathered me another herd to bring it up and make that big money. Now I made it down to Texas, got another herd, headed back up. I got there about late summer this time. It was almost winter, and so I just decided to stay and winter my cattle there, just in this area actually, and waited out the winter. That was about the time that those Osage Indians decided there wasn't any buffalo left in western Kansas to go hunt, so they turned and sold all of their reservation land back to the government at $1.25 an acre. And of course, the government turned right around and sold it back to us veterans for $1.75 an acre. So while I was sitting there wintering my cattle and taking it easy, why I ran into a fella that was part of my wagon train. His name was John P. McCullough, and he had been on my wagon train the year before and had gone out to Denver, Colorado, and he got out there and he just froze his backside off, and he decided that he didn't like it out there. So he decided he did like it in this area because he thought it was so pretty. So he loaded his wife and family back up and headed back here and settled just west of town here on the creek. And he invited me to come over to his cabin and have a chicken dinner and talk to some men about starting a little town right here. Now, there's some kind of federal law somewhere that says that if you got colonel as your title and somebody offers you a chicken dinner, well, you just got to go eat it. So I accepted his offer, and I went over to his little cabin and sat down with a couple men, several men, and we talked about starting this little town of Wellington. And the talk was going great, but then they got to where they got hung up on what to name the town. Well, being an ex-military officer and kind of a follower of tactics and such, I like to read up about Duke Wellington and how he defeated Napoleon at Waterloo, and so I suggested that they name the town Wellington. Well, people liked it, the boys liked it, and the name stuck. So that's how it got its name Wellington. Now, since they took my suggestion for the name of the town, I couldn't very well just up and leave and go back to Texas. So being the businessman I was, Mary and I bought some land here just northeast of Wellington, and it's right there on this 1883 map. You can see my property up there. And my business plan was I'd bring my cattle up here and put them on my property and fatten them up and then take them to market. And that was all right for a year or two, but then things changed. They passed this cattle herd law that said they couldn't bring Texas cattle across the state line, and that changed the trails, and that changed the markets, and that changed everything. So that didn't quite work out, but we stuck around long enough to make sure that Wellington got a good start, and it did get a good start. And then eventually I sold my holdings, my properties here, went back to Waxahachie, and I invested in a wagon business. I had a wagon business, and I had several cattle, of course, and lots of ranch land. And when I died in 1901, I had several buildings downtown and was in the process of building a brand new building just a couple blocks from the Masonic Lodge. And my wagon business was up the street there, and I had over 3,000 acres of ranch land. So we did very well. But my days there in Wellington were probably some of my most memorable. So what I want to talk about next is that Chisholm Trail Museum that y'all got here. Now, the Wellington Chisholm Trail Museum was named in honor of the trail and all the settlers, pioneers, soldiers, cowboys, just anybody who traveled the trail to get here and settle this country. It opened its doors in 1965. 1965 at the old Hatcher Hospital building. Which is directly right across from the courthouse at 502 North Washington. And it's open from June through October, 1 to 5 every day. May and November, they're open in just weekends, 1 to 5. They got all sorts of anything that was brought up the trail to Wellington and Sumner County. There's 3 floors and over 30,000 artifacts of just stuff that made it up the trail. So if you've got a hankering to do some looking, why, they've got the stuff to look at. But plan on spending some time in there, because like I said, they got lots to look at. But you know, there's other things to look at here in this town of Wellington. There's also a couple other museums worth taking a peek at. One of them is that Panhandle Railroad Museum, right in the center of, on Harvey Street. And old Perry Wiley, he put in his railroad museum in the old Wellington Gas Works, which was built back in 1885-86. And it was the city's gas works, produced gas out of coal, and that powered the street lights in Wellington in 1886. But he's fixing it up nice. It's been repurposed several times. Right now, Barry's using it for his museum, and he has collected all sorts of any kind of railroad memorabilia that you can think of. So if you like that kind of stuff, why, that's the place to go look. Now, Mary, when she goes looking, why, she likes to look at that National Depression Glass Museum down on Main Street. They've got all sorts of old pretty glass. She'll spend hours in there looking. Now me, I'm a rambunctious spirit. I get nervous in there. I think I'm going to knock something over, so I kind of stay out and let her do the looking. But man, it can be a couple hours. And then sometimes she likes to go down the street and look at that Beehive quilt shop, named after the old Beehive grocery store that was here from 1880 to 1930. Now those ladies in there will fix you up with any kind of pretty cloth, sewing needle, thread, and all the fixings to make you the prettiest quilt you ever thought. So you got plenty to look at here in Wellington if you make it up this way. Now, my old friend Lonnie Stephen, he thought I should talk a little bit of a couple good trail stories to interest you. So we'll try to jump right into that. Now, Caldwell has a lot of good stories, but there's a lot of good people down there that can tell them stories, and so I don't want to step on anybody's boots. I'll just let them tell them stories. But I will tell you about a little shooting that happened in a little town west of here, about 7 miles. It was right on the trail, a little town called Sumner City. And Sumner City was located about 7-8 miles west of Wellington. Now, this is an 1872 railroad map, the Ashton Peak and Santa Fe Railroad map, and you'll notice that Wellington's not even on that map. Now, I think the map was drawn up in 1869. The reason being that Sumner City is there, but I can't believe what they'll think out there, or Oxford. Anyway, Sumner City, in 1865, before the cattle even started coming up this way, there was a couple fellows by the name of DeGola and Caddo, and they run a ranch way station there, a way station for horses, you can come in there and change out your horses, get some ammunition, get some coffee, stuff you needed for the trail, for people that were traveling up and down the trail, like Jesse Chisholm. And of course, when they started to form the counties, it turned out that this location of this ranch was a geographical center of the county. So a lot of investors from Wichita thought that this would be the perfect place for a Sumner County seat. So they came down and wanted to build a city, and they were down here in late 1869, 70, and started building their town. Here's the better map that shows the Chisholm Trail coming up through Caldwell, and then up to through Sumner City. You'll see. See if I can mark it there. So right over there is Sumner City, and of course Wellington over here. That's Oxford. Wellington, sorry. And Caldwell, of course, right down here. Now, one thing I'm going to do another story coming up. They don't show the Chicasky River in here, which is kind of, but they show this town, Chicasky. And that's about where Ryland's Crossing is, about right here. And that'll play into the next story I'm going to talk about. So kind of keep that in mind. Now, there wasn't any city plat maps of Sumner City, but I got the newspaper. They did print a newspaper for about 6 months, and I went through that newspaper. I think there's only 6 editions or something. And I found businesses that advertised there, and I figured out where those businesses were on their street, and so I kind of figured out this city map, and it shows most of the businesses that were on there. There's a few places that aren't quite the exact location, but close enough. I don't think anybody's going to argue with me. Okay, sorry about that. Well, anyway, so in 1871, July of 1871, they got started in 1869, and in 1870, they were going strong. That's about the time they opened up this land for settlement. And by 1871, they had like 16 buildings and twice that many tent dwellings, a few houses. They were going pretty strong, a lot faster than Wellington or some of the other towns. But in July of 1871, this Mexican drover by the name of Bedeno rode into town, and he was riding south, and he come into town, and he come over here to this Southwestern Hotel right down here in the corner, southwest corner, and he went inside and ordered himself some dinner. So he was, while he was well into his dinner, eating away, while these 2 other drovers rode into town. These boys were a little more intense. They went from building to building. First they went to the boot shop, old Joe Smith's boot shop, and looked around inside. Then they went to the Sumner City Saloon, and then they made it over to the Southwestern Hotel. Now the hotel proprietor was a woman by the name of Mrs. Moreland. And they asked her why she'd seen anybody new in town, and why she didn't know what their purpose was or why they were asking, and she didn't really care. She just pointed over in the corner to Bedeno, and with that, one of those cowboys looked and says, well, that's the blankety blank. He unslung his rifle and stepped up to the door, and he shot old Bedeno straight through the head. Woo-wee, did that make a mess, and boy, will that turn your appetite. Anyway, he turns to the lady, and Mrs. Moreland, and he gives her a $10 gold piece, and he says, I'm sorry for the mess, ma'am, but that man shot my brother, and I'm just doling out a little frontier justice. So then he turned to a couple rounders that were sitting there, and he said, boys, if you'll bury this fella, Bedeno, why, you can have his horse and his belongings for your trouble. With that, they jumped on their horses, and they headed back towards Wichita. Well, Sumner City, you know, trails changed, the herd law came into effect, the railway went different directions, so there wasn't much to keep Sumner City in Sumner City. So Sumner City just basically fell apart, dried up and blew away within a 2 to 3 year time frame. Half the buildings got moved to Wellington, which helped them secure the county seat, and the other half went to a town not too far away, up by Anson. Now, them 2 rounders, they took that Bedeno and they took him down to the creek that was real close to there, and they just dug a shallow grave in that sand. They threw his body in there, and they covered him up. And Then they went and took the money and bought him a big old bottle of whiskey and got full. Well, about, a year or so later, the rains come and they washed that sand off the poor old Badeno, and somebody riding along, they picked up his skull and they put it on a fence post right there on the trail. And for many years, the only thing that marked where Sumner City was Badeno. So, anyway, that's my story about Sumner City. Oh, I forgot to mention one of the key figures here. That's why. This, Wellington, the newspapers at the time say that Billy Coron, who was a Texas trail master, he was shot by this Mexican on just south of Abilene. And Badeno had headed south, and a posse followed after him. That posse contained a couple men. John Wesley Hardin, who I'm sure you've heard of, was kind of a notorious outlaw gunner, and another fellow by the name of John Coron, which was the brother of the Billy Coron, the Texas Trail Laws. So John Wesley Hardin wrote about this event in his book about 1890 something, and he tried to describe the story, but he got a few things wrong. First off, he said it was in Bluff City, not Sumner City. Well, Bluff City didn't come on the scene for another 10 years, and it was never all right on the Chisholm Trail, so that didn't work out. And the other thing is he tried to take credit for the shooting, which I think if I was John Coron, it would be me pulling that trigger, not Mr. Harding. So I'm sure Mr. John Coron did the shooting. Anyway, that's my story of Sumner City. Now I'd like to talk to you a little bit about an event that happened here in Sumner County about 1874. Now the Army contracted with several contractors, like this wagon train that was taking Indian supplies down to the Indian Agency and then the forts. But they also contracted with a company called the Southwestern Stagecoach Company. Southwestern Hotel, Southwestern, everything was Southwestern, I guess, back then. Anyway, they contracted with them to do the mail route. And they held that contract for several years, but that contract was getting ready to expire July 1 of 1874. So they put out the contract for bid, and another company by the name of Bale and Williamson undercut Southwestern Stage Company and got the bid. Now this kind of didn't make Southwestern Stage Boys very happy, so they hired a bunch of thugs and horse thieves to go and steal all of the stock that Mr. Williamson had set up along the trail at the way stations to supply the wagons as they went down through there. And they did. He had several horse thieves, some numbers about 70, but they stole every way station stock except for one. And at that way station, the agent there sat in the barn with his animals all night long, and he had one of them there fancy needle guns, and he protected his stock. But the ruse didn't work too well because Mr. Williamson was able to roust up a couple of ponies and one rider who made the trip all the way from Wichita down to Anadarko Indian Agency by July 1, and he secured the contract. But that didn't stop. Those horse thieves didn't just steal the stock from Bale and Williamson. They also stole about every free-ranging mule and horse in a pasture all through the county. Well, this angered most of the citizens of the county. And word got out about who was involved in this horse thieving. And warrants were put out. And Sheriff John Davis, no relation to me, Mr. Sean Davis, he got the warrants for 7 of the horse thieves. And he put together a posse of 7 men from Wellington to go down to Caldwell, because Caldwell was where the horse thieves made their headquarters, and arrest these men. Well, Mr. Davis thought it would be better to go at nighttime and be calmer. So if he went in at night and arrested these 7 men, he'd get his men. Well, he was dead wrong, because when he got down to Caldwell, he found out that he was outnumbered 10 to 1. and decided that this wasn't a good idea. So kind of backed off a little bit. Now, about a week earlier in this time frame, there was one of those wagon load of goods going down to Indian forts, and there had been an Indian uprising. And they attacked, Pat Hennessy was the wagon master. They attacked old Pat Hennessy and scalped him and killed him. And so I heard some story that that's how Hennessy, Oklahoma got its name, was from Pat Hennessy's demise, but I don't know if that's true or not. Some of you people have to do that goggle or something and figure that out. But anyway, Sheriff Davis, because of that, there was a small detachment of militia soldiers sitting on the border, Kansas-Oklahoma border. And they were led by Mr. Mike Meter. Some of you might have heard his name. I think he was sheriff in Wichita and Colorado for a while. But anyway, so Davis sent a couple men down to talk to Mr. Meter and see if he would assist them in arresting their horse thieves. Well, they got down there and Mr. Meeker said no, his job was to keep Indians in the territories, and he didn't have any inclination to get involved in any county matters. So this news got back to Sheriff Davis, and he was a little disappointed. About that time, one of his posse members informed him that there was a large party of concerned citizens, what we would probably call vigilantes, sitting up at that Rylands Crossing up there, waiting for them to pass back towards Wellington so that they could have a little party for those horse thieves, one of them necktie parties. And Sheriff Davis, well, he just said, well, send 2 men up there and see if they'll join my posse and help us capture these boys. And they did. They joined, and they came down to help him out. Now, as you recall, most of the land that was sold to these settlers, a lot of them were war veterans. So these guys weren't just old dumb farmers with a pitchfork. These were military men that knew what they were doing. And they were organized into 2 companies of men, each company having a captain. And so there was about 100 to 120 men, and they came down to Caldwell, and they surrounded the town. They just picketed around the whole town. So there wasn't any horse thieves going to get away. Well, this show of force was enough to scare the horse thieves a little bit, and Sheriff Davis was able to ride into town and get his warrants served. Now, he only found 5 of the 7, but of those 5, he was able to get them back to Wellington, because by this time it was 1 or 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. By the time they got to Wellington, it was daylight. And he put him in the calaboose there on West Lincoln, which is about where the Regent Theater is at. And everybody went to bed. The concerned citizens went home, and that day, 2 of them was able to make bail, was able to get arraigned and make bail. And the judge let them out, but he said that they had to stay in Wellington. Well, that lasted 10 minutes. They stole a horse and buggy within 10, 15 minutes, and they were lit out for Wichita. Sheriff Davis sent a man after them, but they were long gone, never did catch him, and they never were seen since. So they were smart enough to get the heck out of town. But so he still had his 3 prisoners there in the calaboose. That night, about 150 concerned citizens rode quietly into Wellington. They went to the jail and they overpowered the guard. There were 2 guards, I think, that night. They took the prisoners and they headed south of town towards the hanging tree. Now, this picture shows Wellington. Back then, the road out of town was just kind of straight down that road right there. And that hanging tree was on the south side of the creek, right about in there. It was a large elm tree with a large, strong limb. And as they were leaving, several of the citizens of town knew this was going to happen, and they followed to watch the party. And the vigilantes basically had to keep them at gunpoint and kept them from crossing the creek. They had to stay on the north side of the creek and watch through the trees while the vigilantes had their little party. And the first man, they put the rope around his neck, threw the rope over the tree limb, and then pulled it up. So first they asked him if he had any last words, and he shook his head no, and then they slowly pulled him up to where he was dangling, and he did the dance until he could dance no more. Now, you might have heard of this fellow before. His name, Billy Brooks. He was a thug and outlaw too, but he also was sheriff of, or marshal of Newton, Kansas when it was the railhead 2 years earlier, in 1872. So he had some law enforcement background, but he was hired by the Southwest Stage Company as a hired gun. And well, his hiring days were over. So, and the next person was a fellow by the name of Charlie Smith, also known as One-Armed Charlie. He had lost one of his arms in the Civil War, and he worked as a bartender down in Caldwell. But he's also a known horse thief. Now, his real name was Sewell Ford, and he had a brother by the name of Tom Ford, or I think he went by Tom Smith as well as an alias, who was hanged at that Rylands Crossing just 1 year earlier for stealing horses. So it ran in the family. The other interesting thing about that is Sewell and Tom both were supposedly the sons of Thomas Ford, Governor Thomas Ford of Illinois, who did some great things for Illinois, but he was also involved in the Mormon Wars that caused the Mormons to change their location. So interesting little tidbit on that story. But anyway, they asked Charlie if he had any last words. He shook his head no, and they pulled himself up nice and slow, and he did the dance till they danced no more. The last person hung was a fellow by the name of Lewis Benjamin Hasbrook. He was a lawyer. He was a lawyer, and he worked for a lot of the horse thieves, and he provided them fake alibis to get them off frequently. So he wasn't a very well-liked character by these concerned citizens. So, but Hasbrook was a little different in that he fell to his knees and he begged forgiveness, and he just said he wasn't any part of this, and he had an alibi, and he wasn't with these horse thieves, but they weren't buying any of it, and they pulled him up slowly, and he pleaded no more. So all three of them dangled in the tree till mid-morning the next morning. They didn't even, they just let them dangle. Finally, somebody went down and cut them down, loaded them in a wagon, hauled them out to the Pioneer Cemetery, and they dug one big hole and put all three bodies in one big hole and covered them up. They still had the ropes on their necks when they buried them. Now that Pioneer Cemetery, I was thinking Della did a lot of research. I got information that Della was the one that marked where that grave site was at. There's no headstone or anything, but it sits in the southwest corner of the cemetery right about in there. And I don't know, did she write something about that? I don't remember where I got that information, but I've been there. I've actually witched it once or twice, so I think she's correct.
Well, that's how they found the graves, and it was.
Just for fun, that Jim Bales character, he went out, in 2019, he went out on Memorial Day and took them boys a shot of whiskey. Just thought maybe they might enjoy a little shot. They didn't drink very much. So anyway, again, Chisholm Trail Museum, 502 North Washington. Come by and see us. June 4th is the opening. We're having a historic quilt exhibit. It'll go all month long. It's in conjunction with the Beehive Quilt Shop. And we have, we're going to display, 14 quilts? Well, we have about 35 quilts. We're only going to display 14. Some of them dating, I read a date on there, one of them said 1787, but we had an appraiser come in and say 1850, I think. And there's some 5-star quilts there, she said, so some pretty nice quilts to look at. Yeah, come see us. We'll be glad. And if you can't make it on those hours, 1 to 5, give me a call or give the museum a call. We'll set up a special, let you in the door, let you just wander the halls. We've been known to do that. So that's my story. And while you got me here, if there's any questions, I'd be glad to answer them. I'll answer them as best I can. Yep.
Yes, sir. I've heard that Jesse Chisholm had died from eating rancid bear grease.
That's the story I heard as well, yes, sir. Yes, sir. You gotta cook something a little different, I suppose, huh? Bear grease in Oklahoma. I guess they probably had bears at one time or another. Any other questions I can answer while I was here?
Where is Ryland's Crossing exactly?
So about where Perth is, probably just, let's see, just west of Perth, maybe, somewhere, let's go back to that map if I can find it. Let's look at that map. So, now, I've also heard it called Hearst Crossing, and you'll notice there's a Hearst post office box right here. But I'm thinking it was right in here. There's, yeah, right at that location. This map, of course, doesn't show the SCHGS River, but I'm almost sure there's Portland and Perth in between, so right in that area. And I know you know where that's at, you can deer hunt it down there, I'm sure.
Could you display the first map?
The first map? The first map? Which map was that? This one?
No, it showed where the trail split apart.
No, that's not it. Where the trails split apart. Well, that's kind of
That
that.
one.
Yeah. Well, actually, the official expert on that map, or on that trail would be right there. He could probably tell you more than I could, but from Caldwell, let's see, they branched off and went to Ellsworth before they crossed the state line, didn't they, Gary?
Yeah. In Oklahoma,
You
about
know,
12, 15 miles.
and the same for the Dodge Trail, for the Western Trail?
The Western Cattle Trail was a lot further west.
Yeah, it was almost well, it was on halfway through Oklahoma before it split off, wasn't it? And that map doesn't really
What's
show
the
that.
second trail on there? The first one's what?
First one's, this one I think is the Western Trail. This says Dodge City branch on this map. And then this one says the Ellsworth Cox branch. And then, of course, the solid gray line, that was the Chisholm Trail. This was a tourism map that I think the chair of the tourism for all three states put that together several years ago. I need an updated map. Yes?
Are you familiar with the Goodnight Trail?
I've heard of it.
Coming
He
through
knows all about
Amarillo
it.
and Canyon up in there. I just didn't know where they came across to go up
A lot
to
further
the
west.
trail.
Yeah.
Lot further.
Tex, where was your land northwest of Wellington?
So you see this map here. This would be, it actually, today would be part of Wellington, about where Plessy, Midwest used to be, Tech used to be. So, this, I'll try to draw it here. This street, I don't think I can. This road right here would be 16th Street, okay, today. And right north of that, the railway station was. So it really, let's see, this would be A Street right here. And this would, of course, be the corner, so it's about where Sonic is today. Get my big head out of the way. Does that make sense? Yeah. Oh, I know I could do
Sir,
Yeah.
10 miles south on the Dalton Road is an intersection. There's a little plaque saying it was blacksmith shop and general store or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I was told that they had to have, they had to be 1 day for them to get back.
Now say that again, you that way.
It's not close enough for us to go there, tell us to go there and come back and come back. But this is 10 miles south of Dalton Road.
I hadn't heard that before. Dalton. Yeah, well, that's
That's
wrong
it.
one.
put the township map up there yet on there?
Sure.
What did he say was on 10 miles south of the Dalton Road?
Yes.
What was it that he said was there?
Yeah, what did he say?
Well, it said there was a plaque, correct?
Yeah,
Cast iron plaque?
there in cast iron, that's like for aluminum.
Oh,
It's stuck in the corner there, and it says, well, they have a hardware store and a grocery store, or 5 and 10.
Well, I haven't seen it.
that would be,
Honeywell?
not very well, no. No, but there was another little community over there. I think about that a little bit. Okay, so which map did you say here?
The township map is one, I think another one down, no, from this one here.
Not that one.
No, it would be above that one.
That one?
Yeah, you have two trails on that one also.
Yeah, yeah.
Two county trails, where-
Two trails, and this is interesting. Like I said, it says an 1872 Ashton railroad map, and what it was doing was showing, well, it's trying to promote people to come to Kansas and settle and buy the railroad property. But it shows the Fort Sill and Cattle Trail, which shows it basically going through, about where Wellington would be really. And then it shows the Western Cattle Trail out there.
That would be the western capital,
Well, it
that
says,
road right there you're talking about, the second one is the B. Ellsworth Road.
That's, yeah. But they have it listed as the Western Trail.
they have it listed as a western capital.
Is
And
it
that's
on,
this map right here.
is it on the map?
Huh?
Is it on the map as western?
Yes.
It says, where'd
On
you
the-
get that?
That is, actually, I got that off the Kansas Historical Site, I think.
I just looked at Peter's.
But on the map you just showed, is western on there?
Yeah, if I can blow that up. No, I can't go show definition. But, you know, I just basically just brought out Sumner County on that map and right there. And here, I'll just bring it over to you because you can see it better on
So
my.
probably what they're saying is it's just simply west of everything else, and we call it the West Trail.
See it starts out, so Western.
That way they can differentiate between.
And then it says Trail to Fort Sill and Cattle Trail for this one right here.
That's one of the few maps that shows Sumner
Well,
City on
they
it.
called it Trail to Fort Sill and Cattle Trail. But, and you know, Buffalo Bill Mathewson, in 1921, when they were trying to figure out where the Chisholm Trail really went, because they were putting in the Meridian Highway, and he swears up and down that it really followed, Jesse's Trail actually followed that line and not going over Summer City. But the DeGalo Caddo
And one,
Ranch,
and one west of it, I would bet it goes over.
yeah, I would too, because the Western Trail would have been coming clear over here.
Where it's got the Dodge City.
Yeah, yeah.
90 miles.
But when this map was drawn, there wasn't a Western Trail to Dodge City. Probably wasn't even a Dodge City then, was there?
72 is when
So,
Dodge started, but it didn't, the
Yeah.
trail didn't start there until 74.
yeah. And see, like I said, it says 72 on the map, but I found the copyright date 69, so they probably drew it a lot earlier than that.
Now, when the cattle came to Caldwell, were they coming to the railroad, or were they just going by Caldwell and route to Abilene?
In this time frame, they were just going en route to Abilene. And, yeah, they didn't do the cattle
Or they-
trail till.
Or they went to Ellsworth because they had the railroad there too. But that was later, wasn't it?
That was a little later.
Yeah.
And then the railroad come through in 85, Caldwell. Is that correct?
85.
Yeah, so that's when it became the railhead and then the trail reverted back to Caldwell. So 75, I think, is when they passed the herd law, but in 72, 73, 74, the local landowners were already, upset about these cattle coming across their property. So I'm sure there were some arguments and little gunfire exchange and stuff like that.
There was a gentleman killed at 130th North, and not Meridian, next mile west. be right where the Rock Island, or the railroad line comes down.
From the north, the Rock Island line that came down?
South of Peck,
Yeah.
miles south of Peck.
South of that road. I don't know the map.
Have you ever heard of the trail to the Fort Sill, Oklahoma? You ever heard of that trail going through Sumner County?
Well, that same trail, basically, yeah.
Not the same trail.
Uh-huh.
That's called across the Minnesota at 120th.
Well, you know, the trail evolved several years, so,
What's that?
I mean, the trail changed locations a lot, so.
Trail change.
Yeah.
There was a rock crossing at 130th north. And that's where a lot of cattle crossed because they had good footing in there to get across.
Now, this map here, I didn't put it in my storyline, but this is actually, it's a pretty interesting map in that it was used by the school teacher, the principal, Sumner County principal of the schools, and it marks all the locations, those little dots that you see, those are locations of the country schoolhouses, okay, throughout the county. And I'm assuming they use this map to get,
Don't mind if I come
no,
over
not at
close.
all, not at all. So, but I don't know where 120 would be on that map, it's still in sections, so you can count them, I suppose you can figure it out.
It'd be pretty near the town of Ziba.
Which would be up north,
Right.
that would be up north by Peck, so.
Yeah.
um, Yeah, I can't read what that little town says up there.
That'd be West Street today.
Yeah.
But this one was London.
Oh, in London. Okay, so is that a gunfight between two guys that
What's
were
that?
neighbors, or? There was a gunfight up there between two guys that, weren't really neighbors, but they were locals. And they fought until they were out of ammunition, and then they fought with hand to hand, and finally they said, oh, I'll come back tomorrow, we'll finish the thing.
I don't know if I've ever read Jackson Stewart.
Yeah. That's what's in there.
Where
Yeah.
the cattle come across and got in this guy's corn crop. Young corn crop nut. And he got out and shot a cow.
Uh-huh.
And then
And that started the
cowboy
fight.
shot him.
Yeah, I think I have heard that story. Anyway, I was about to say, this map, I think it's this map, shows, you can't read it here, but it shows Mayfield, was first Bellevue, and then Marengo, and then Mayfield, and it was really on the trail as well. And then, of course, it moved because the railroad come through at a different location. They only moved it a mile and a quarter or something like that. Anyway,
Mayfield moved what? East, west, north, south?
I think they moved to northeast just a little bit. And it shows that location, that cemetery at the church, where several interesting people are buried. I think that's where you can see the ruts from the trail is in that cemetery. Where did Sherry go? Should be, oh,
It's in the SCHGS Cemetery on 50th.
okay, so that's down by the.
You can go south, if you go south, go west on 160, and then south on 49 to 50th, and turn back east. It's about a quarter of a mile. And the sun has to be just right, and the ruts go from the southwest corner to the northeast corner. And if you go to the northeast corner, you can see the tombstone, Hattie Mae Chesterman's tombstone. And she died while her folks were traveling the trail.
Is that Union Chapel Cemetery or the one a mile south?
It's the one the mile south,
Okay,
the SCHGS Cemetery.
okay.
How old a map is this right here?
It's marked, you can't see it on the deal, but I think it's marked 1880.
But your oldest map you have is what?
1870, 1880 rural school. So, pardon me, now what did you say?
Is that the oldest map that you have?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's the oldest map we have at the museum.
because at that point, normally they made maps, did the survey work and made them, and the time the public got them was a year or two later.
Well, this doesn't look like, looks like somebody, well, they had it done a little cheaper so that they could mark where the schoolhouses were and stuff like that. This doesn't look as defined and detailed as some of those other maps.
When is the Talking Tombs in Caldwell? When is that? Is it every year or?
What's that now?
The Talking Tombs?
Down at Caldwell? I really don't know if they do that every year when they do the Chisholm Trail. One time they did it during Christmas.
Oh, yeah.
Now, last year we did an event at the museum where we had a lot of the town founders and town famous people. We reenacted those, and that was well received, and we'll probably do that again sometime in the future.
When did you say it would be, October 15th?
No. Unless my outfitter decides not to go hunting this year. I've already got my tags. You know how expensive that is.
She does.
Okay, any other questions? Have I bored you silly?